So, did we last time do the beginning? Like, did we talk about managers and drummers?
Yes.
Okay, that's what I thought we would. So let's recap. Okay. Last time we started to talk about industrialization, particularly the rise of the corporations. Okay, it sounds like a movie starring Schwarzenegger, The Rise of the Corporations. Okay, now at the top of those corporations, you had these innovators, corporate giants, the people who use their abilities, we'll just say, to in effect create some of these giant corporations or trusts. Okay, kind of at the top of a food chain. Secondly, we talked about who kind of actually runs these corporations day to day, those middle managers, and how these corporations had gotten so big that you could no longer have one person who's in charge and knowing everything that's going on in their entire corporation. But they've departmentalized it, and that different departments of a corporation handle different basic areas like accounting and sales, things like that. We also talked about the birth of the American consumer, I think, last time. Well, today, where I want to start is the effect of this, and I don't know if this is actually a word, the corporatization, I think I'm throwing in an extra syllable, of America. Is it will have an effect on women. And what the big effect will be a shift in American companies of a position that we would call the clerk position, from a position that was largely held by men to a position that was largely held by women. When companies were smaller, being a clerk in a company was part of almost like an apprentice, where you start at the bottom as a clerk, but it was really just training you to go up to the next level. And so clerk was entry level, but with a possible promise of moving up later. But when corporations became extraordinarily big, and the needs for lower level clerks, okay, became like giant, and the number of positions you can advance to got smaller, many, if not most, of these clerk positions no longer will be positions that led to advancement. And these positions would then largely be held by women. These positions, in effect, became what we would call a dead end. A job without opportunities to rise in the ranks of the corporation. In 1900, 77% of all stenographers and typists were women. And by 1920, about half of all low-level office jobs were women. This continued to be the norm all the way through the 40s, the 50s, and the 60s. Maybe a little bit of an exception in the 40s. In the 50s and 60s, women started to refer to these positions as the pink-collar ghetto. And what you would particularly start to notice in the 50s and 60s is that people would enter a corporation. Okay, so let's say two people both got a job at X corporation. Employee A at X corporation was a woman. Employee B was a male. Both came to their job with equal training, equal credentials. Flash forward 10 years later, that person, the woman who had entered the corporation would basically be in the same level of employment, whereas the male would have gone off onto a managerial track and started to rise up through the corporation. And so this basically will remain a thing until the 1970s, when we begin, not end, begin to see a shift. That is when we first begin to see the beginning of what we now call the feminist movement, and we start to see a breaking up of this rule. But it remains pretty much the rule from this time period which we're talking about until the 1970s, when it starts to shift. The other thing that was which was true about these corporations was that not only were these jobs being held by women, but the women that held these jobs were almost exclusively white. These jobs appeal to white working class women, largely because obviously cleaner than factory work, and they were certainly better paid than domestic service, or even factory work. And so this corporatization of America starts to create this class of American worker. Yeah. That was okay. Yes.
Why was it almost exclusively white?
Because basically, A, the corporations, that's who they would hire, and B, white women had usually would prefer to go do this than work in a factory or go into domestic service. And what you're going to start to find is things like domestic service would be more likely to be like African American women. And so you start to see, even though the North was less likely to have actual blatant laws, though they did, laws on the books for segregation and discrimination, it was still happening. So in the South, even though it was much more blatant and big signs and stuff like that, discrimination and segregation was happening in the North as well. It was just not so much talked about that that's what they were doing, even though they were doing it. The last group I want to talk about in this corporate structure. So at the top you've got your Rockefellers, your one percenters, okay? In the middle you've got the people who are kind of running the show in the corporation. Then you have the people that are actually doing the work. The people on the shop floor, the people on the factory floor. Now, during this era, we're going to see another example of change over time. At the beginning of this era, you're going to have a large number of people on the factory floor who were skilled. And as a skilled worker, Usually, rather than being paid by a wage for a number of hours, oftentimes skilled workers would work out contracts or deals in which they were paid by the amount they produced. A coal miner by the amount of coal they mine. A machinist by the number of parts they create. A glass blower by the amount of product they created. These workers were what we would call very autonomous. When you use the word autonomous, what is autonomous? What's autonomous? They're independent. And what these people did is they monitored their own production and often had self-imposed limits. Why would you put a self-imposed limit upon yourself? Why would you not just basically work and just make as many products as you possibly could in a day? Why would you say basically kind of stop at a certain amount, okay, that you yourself have kind of imposed? What would the reason? Why would you do that? Yeah, okay, because you by limiting the amount that you produced, you keep it rare, thus you keep it valuable. And so what this had a tendency to do, though, is this a cheap way of manufacturing or more expensive way of manufacturing? If this worker has this independence, if this worker can basically control how much they made, if the worker basically made it so that you almost force you to pay more for their product, is this a cheap way of manufacturing or a more expensive way? So, what is it basically going to become the mission of these factories to do? If you were the manager above these people, what would you want to do? Pardon me? You want to reduce the costs. Okay? And so what they do in order to make this cost in effect go away is what we call de-skilling. I mean, just the name itself has this connotation of, we're going to de-skill you. I'm scared. So what happens in industrialization is you de-skill jobs and you try and replace it more by mass production. And what you do with these machinists, let's say, you make it so that their jobs are so subdivided in the production that they're no longer masters of a craft. So think of it. Before this era begins, let's say you were working in a machine shop that made like watches or something like that. And so as the craftsman, you are creating all the gears and springs and stuff like that. And so that's a lot that you're responsible for, right? And so you were the master. You've got craft going here. So you're expensive. So what the company would do is try and look at each little part that you create and make it into just and break it down so that instead of doing all of those little parts, you're just in charge of this one little wheel, stamping it out all the same, all day, exactly the same part, one by one, over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, okay? And basically what you do to these jobs is where in the past they required you to have things that you think about and skills to do. But now you are doing the same task, okay? And it has been so simplified that do we have to pay you as much anymore? No, we don't. De-skilling. De-skilling will basically increase production, huzzah. It will cut labor costs, yay. okay? But why? Workers are now easily replaced. Okay? If I in the beginning, if I lost Ryan the craftsman, okay, oh my God, I have to find another Ryan. That's so hard to do. Okay, but Justin the stamper. 20 people sitting outside the door that can do the exact same thing. All right. Now, what we say about this era and what made American manufacturing so much ahead of really everybody else at the time is that the United States was advanced in the art of interchangeable parts. But what effectively became an interchangeable part in this era? People did, workers did. Do you see what happened here? The other thing that emerged in this era was an idea known as scientific management. I mean, just the name of, again, another name that just to me sounds a wee bit scary. The Lord leader of scientific management was a guy by the name of Frederick W. Taylor. And what Frederick W. Taylor will propose is that we eliminate all brain work from manual labor. We don't want you to have to think, okay? The thinking, that's up to the managers. Managers think. Workers, no. Workers, you just do what you're told. You don't need to ask a question because it's so easy to do. You don't have to make a suggestion because it's already perfect as far as how easy it is to do it. Okay? You just do it. We don't want you to bother your little head thinking about anything here. Why? Because you think that might be more expensive for me. I just want you to just do. And you see this, it starts to happen in every industry. I mean, even today, now we're in the American economy largely service-based, but even in service-based industries, they try to make it so that the people don't have to think. You know, the person who runs the cash register at McDonald's, all the buttons, Big Mac. I don't need to know the cost of the Big Mac. I don't need to have, all I have to do is press Big Mac button. and then back in the fry room, Big Mac. Okay? You don't have to think. And then the scary thing is if you then throw a curveball at somebody who's running that cash register, and it's not their fault. It's because it's how the training is done. It's how the machine operates. But let's say in my family, my one son, he doesn't eat meat. Okay, he's made this decision at 11 that he doesn't want to kill animals, and so he will not eat meat. But every now and again, you're in a situation where McDonald's is the only option. Okay. So you go to McDonald's and you try to get them to basically bring two things together that you know they have back there, okay? They have bread and they have cheese, okay? And they could put those two items together and create something my son will eat, right? So you try this in several different ways. With like a cheeseburger with nothing but the bread and the cheese. And they're going, and it's not because they can't obviously know what to do here. What the problem is there's no button. There's no there's nothing that makes it so they can now just place the order in the way that they've been trained to do in 2 minutes so they can get to the next customer. Okay? And so it throws people for a loop because under the scientific management system, you're making them think, and they're not supposed to. Got it?
They have that option at In-N-Out.
What's that?
Yeah, you can order grilled cheese or a wish burger at In-N-Out.
They apparently don't have, they're not so scientifically managed, apparently, at In-N-Out then. No, we have successfully gained grilled cheese at In-N-Out. McDonald's is always an adventure. What are we gonna get?
Is there another way you do it?
Pardon me?
You said there are two ways that you go about the way you're doing it.
Did they just have grilled cheese? Like,
No, they don't. It's not a button. They ran out of space. I don't know. It's a hamburger. Anyway,
Is it Patrick?
it's Pat. So, yeah, Patrick Henry Monroe. Okay. Anyway. The other thing that Frederick W. Taylor proposed, now if you draw a line here, this is something that didn't work quite as well. The top part pretty much has survived all the way to this day, okay, trying to make it so that workers don't have to think. The other thing that Frederick W. Taylor tried to do was make it so that each task, he'd have an engineer time how long it should take to do that task. And what he would do is he tried to incentivize, okay, speed as far as how workers worked by saying you make a little bit more money if you hit the timing mark, okay? And so just imagine somebody, you know, the entire day going, all right, go, 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 and, you know, and yeah, exactly. This one did not work. Workers kind of resisted the constant stopwatch thing over them as far as getting their tasks done. I mean, even now, like when you're in the drive-through and there's a timer, and you know, sometimes a little bell goes off at 2 minutes, and you don't see everybody rushing around like it was an emergency to deal with that. In the end, there's some major changes that we're now seeing in the workplace. Now again, for the first big change, I started it last time, so the first big change was we moved from a society where people had a tendency to be more independent, like farmers working for themselves, into an economy where people have to now work for someone else. Okay, that's a big change. But there were some other shifts as well. For one, workers now have little freedom to negotiate their working conditions. Okay, remember, Ryan with a skill, could he make demands? Could he kind of control his day a wee bit? Yeah. But when you just have to do the mindless task, can you then make big demands upon your employer? And the answer was no. For the rest of us, we have the Walmartization of our consumer goods. Things are cheap. The more industrialized, the easier and faster it is to make a product, the cheaper that product is. And so the fact that these products are cheaper allows many Americans now to enjoy these consumer goods. Now this is, note, I used a many here. I did not use most. It definitely increases the number of items available for consumers. But you also have to remember that by reducing wages, as they will, the reduction of wages is going to prevent a lot of the lowest paid people in society to be able to now even enjoy these things. Another result is this is going to contribute to a more sharp class distinction developing in the United States. You have a wealthy elite, which is getting smaller but richer. Their numbers get smaller, but the amount of wealth they control gets greater. You have, at this time period, an emerging middle class. We'll have to check back in another 5 years to see if our current trend continues. Our current trend is that it is now a dying middle class. But at this point, it was an emerging middle class. And finally, a struggling class of workers. Now, the struggling class of workers was wide, okay? There were some people who were struggling but making it okay. But there was also a large number within that subgroup which were in poverty. That the industries in which they worked had become so disskilled that the pay very little. Lastly, the de-skilling of industry is also going to increase the number of women and children in the workplace. Low skill means you can have little kids do it. Little kids can do the work. Little pay means that if your family is to survive, it's all hands on deck. It means that in your family, you need to have all the adults working and the kids too. That the pay has gotten so small that in order for the family to make it, all hands on deck. At this time, 1 in 5 children under the age of 16 worked outside the home. The other thing that emerged, I alluded to earlier when we were talking about women in the workplace, in the corporate offices, largely being white women. We are going to see other effects of segregation and discrimination show up within the factories. For the most part, African American workers were largely barred from the factory floor. And within factories, African Americans were forced to have the most menial jobs in a company. That would usually be the cleaning up positions. As far as who was hired, for the most part, this industrial era corresponds directly with the second major era of immigration to the United States. And so the main workforce in these factories would be cheap immigrant labor. Questions? All right. So right now, and this is a two-parter. Basically what I'm going to do here is I'm going to give you a short answer question in a minute, but what I'm forcing you to do right now, and on a test you might want to do this quickly, but you might want to do this, is before you write your answer, come up with a way of just kind of thinking things out. And so what I'd like to do right now is just quickly write for me maybe a mini T-chart on the costs versus the benefits of industrialization. So just in case you're not getting money terms, costs, that's usually a bad thing. Benefit, usually good thing. So you divide it up, what would be the costs, what would be the benefits of this industrialization that we've talked about both today and last time. I think that's enough brainstorming. So now, what I'm about to give, this is an example of a short answer. And I want you to look at it and note exactly what it is asking. I want you to remember that in a short answer, your job is to just directly answer the question. It's not to come up with a thesis. It's not to come up with a new way of answering the question. It's to look at the question and answer it directly. Does that make sense? So like with a long essay, if you were to see this question as an essay, you could probably take a couple of different approaches. But as a short answer, the answer is just simply answer the question. Okay? So did the benefits of industrialization outweigh its costs? Okay? So you have to choose. Now what would usually happen, if I'm looking at the kind of the code of the way that I've been seeing the short answers from the College Board come out, they would then have a part 2 that would say, give a piece of evidence that disagrees or something like that. But in this question, it's asking you to choose and then give evidence. So I said explain, but maybe the better thing here, let's use the word give evidence as to why you believe what you believe. And so when you make your choice, and then what I would like you to do is use kind of a mental highlighter that you look down at your page and you could see a clear-cut term, event, person, something that is an actual example or evidence that you could use to back up what you're saying. It was bad. No. People were not treated well. No. I would say the benefits outweigh the costs, and give examples as to why. Or the benefits of investment did not outweigh the costs, because. Yeah. Person, event, term. Okay. And so I know I said proper noun, but you could use a term, you could use description. That's fine, so long as it's an accurate, not just conditions were bad. That would be an example. That would be an actual example. Because it's a thing.
Really? Yeah. Marcus sounds better.
That would be yes. And we can prove in Carnegie's name. Okay, so why don't you take one more minute?
I'm going. What did you put? You said no?
Okay, so finish that sentence you're working. Okay, now I'd like you to, in honor of our next topic, go find a Great Wall of China.
I know I don't have some.
You don't know what you have a Great Wall of China yet. Okay. Somebody new. Will you be my Great Wall of China? Matchmaker, matchmaker, make me a match. Find me a find, catch me a catch. Matchmaker, matchmaker, look through your book. And make me a perfect match. Does everybody have a match? Someone matchless? Anyone matchless? You're matchless? You have him already as a match. Okay, who did you just match? Oh, Anyone else matchless? All right, have you matched with either of these two? Okay, so choose one. Okay. Did you have a match? Do you have to today? Okay, well, so what, can we put you down for someone? As a match for, okay, so are you matched with anybody?
Okay, yeah, I'll do that.
Okay, then you match here. Okay, but 1, 2, 3 work together today. So, okay. So,
I told you.
I said that with the class because even though workers' wages, when they're working for the
Don't want trouble.
large-scale agriculture across the world.
I know, I killed him. Jackson must have thought that helped
all the wages in America.
Hold it down.
Good, it's because a lot of things with statistics are very tricky. So you got to drive All right, so going back to your home desk. Back to your home desk. All right, so let's do a quick thumb survey, okay? And on 3, you're going to respond one of these 2 ways. One is you're going to be a giant thumbs up, signifying industrialization rocks, okay? Or a big thumbs down for industrialization sucks, okay? So 1, 2, 3. Mix. Oh, I like when it mixes. Okay. Today we should have been the lineup day. Okay, so do you want volunteers or do you want to be randomly generated?
Randomly generated.
Randomly generated. Okay, so. You know, that is actually after that.
Hey, Grozzy.
30.
You gonna be with me tonight when I'm here.
15. Okay. Chloe H.A.
I was sort of in the middle because I thought that the costs were really bad by hurting the workers and because it cut the labor costs and it needed more workers like in the family to be able to survive. But then it also benefited those who weren't working because it increased production and it made it easier for them to get access.
And both of those things are correct. But you have to choose because in a short answer, because this is actually an example of a short answer, it would want you to now, even if it's by a feather, okay, so you have the scales, okay, and even if it's the feather's going to land and it's going to chew and it's going to make it to one side or the other, which one is it?
I would say the benefits didn't outweigh it.
Okay, and that is fine. So one of the problems with a lot of how we've encouraged you to write in the past is to take that splitting thesis and things like that. But in a short answer, when they give you a tight little, you must answer this thing, You need to answer it directly. Does that make sense? So both of your answers, spot on. You had good evidence for each, but it was basically asking, this question was asking you to choose one. All right? Awesome. All right, so. There we go. Kevin.
All right. It says the benefits of industrialization did not outweigh the costs. The descaling of labor and labor division lowered wages and worker autonomy. This in turn contributed to sharper class distinctions, including a struggling lower class.
All right, and that is exactly how you do it. Okay, one more. The random number generator doesn't like you, Chris.
Does work.
Oh, it does like it. Likes him too much?
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, I said the benefits of industrialization did outweigh its costs. America's industrialization is why it allowed us to like kind of export more than everybody else in the world. And an example would be Andrew Carnegie, who produced 1/5 as much steel as the rest of the countries, top rest of the countries in the world, when you discount America.
Okay, so having proper things, examples and things like that, spot on. Okay, and so the way that I was when we were at the training, they were basically saying if it is a logical, factual backup, it's right. Okay, so long as there is a true fact in there and it makes sense, it is right. Does that make sense? So this is a third thing I saw in the short answers is some people were giving kind of long answers. But here was the problem, and this is one I actually want some clarity and I'm on, is the first thing they said was actually wrong. The second and third thing they said was right. Under, well, I'll call it the Mr. Burr rule. Okay. Which one would you grade? The first one. Okay. And so so I was a little bit more lenient in the way I graded these because I put it out there on the AP US History Internet as to how other people are handling this situation. I'm going to see what response I get. But so that's why I want you to just be very careful and direct in answer. Okay? Yeah.
Wait, what's the most rule?
So basically, let's say if you were told to answer like 2 of the following and you answered 3, and the third one was actually the good answer, and the second one was a good answer, but your first one wasn't.
But it was the other way around, like
If you had reversed it, you would have been fine.
Oh.
Does that make sense? So odds bad. The odds were not in your favor. Okay, yeah.
Does rambling on a short answer like get points off?
So, yeah, it doesn't get you points off, but I think it does because AP grading is mainly if you just look it's look for the right answer as opposed to the wrong answer. But that's where the confusing part is. Sometimes it's in order. So if the first thing you came across was an actual thing, do you look ahead to the next one? And my guess is it's probably gonna be no. Yeah.
If, like, for a question like that, like, they don't, it seems kind of like it could be your opinion, but, like, they don't really want you to, like, go off about how, like, everyone would have been, like, happy, or, like.
Yeah. All they want is you to give
like
evidence.
facts, yeah.
They want you to give evidence. And the way that so what I've seen is that this would be the A. They would then do a B that says what's an additional piece of evidence or something else that's not or something like that. And sometimes a C, what would be evidence that didn't agree with what you chose. So they sometimes would structure the questions, you get in those other thoughts, but you have to do them in the way that they ask directly. Did that make sense? Does that make sense? So it's a little bit different than kind of the way that we've always kind of done things. You know, when we develop our thesis and we'd like to back up what we have to say and stuff like that, here it's, is your response logical and do you have facts to back it up? Boom. Yeah.
Like my issue was on the test was like I wasn't sure like what was enough, like whether my facts were like strong enough to like get the point or whatever. So that's why I kept like rambling on. But like if you
So-
have like one concrete fact that like you know is true that supports
I would
your-
lead with it.
Okay.
And that's why I did this thing where I told you to T-chart it first, rather than jump right in and answer the darn thing. Take a breath, figure out what your best possible answer is, and put that down. Does that make sense? So there is plenty of time to do this. Okay. All right, so our last topic today is immigration. Okay. Now, immigration at this time was actually, there was something that was also a little different. You see, the United States was now bicoastal. Okay. And what basically happened in this era of immigration is that this is most of the United States, and thus this is most of where immigrants will come from. But most of the immigrants from that would come to the eastern part of the United States will come from Europe. We now have a left coast, okay? And over here in California, which is now a state, right? There is going to be a new immigration to the United States. And that is going to be immigration from Asia, principally China. So immigration, the second immigration, is a little bit different. The immigration in this period is very poorly named, because even though it happened over 100 years ago, it is called new immigration. The new immigrants, mostly, so this is when you're always sometimes if you get to kind of the most thing, most of the immigrants came from Southern and Eastern Europe. And they were very different than the majority of Americans who were white Protestants. Okay? These new immigrants from Europe were largely either Catholic, and remember how Catholicism had caused problems with the Irish, or they were Jewish. A large number will be from Russia, Russian Jews, and Eastern Orthodox, people that did a form of Christianity which was completely different than what white Protestant Americans were used to. They were also poor, and they were also very different culturally and language, very, very, very different than what white Americans in the United States were used to. Now, there was a subgroup that is worth noting that were actually arriving in the United States with skills. Particularly people from Wales oftentimes came in as tin workers, people from Scandinavian countries that were sailors, or Germans that were machinists. So that there is that subgroup that were coming in at this time. but for the most part, Native Americans, and notice the quote around Native Americans, okay? Because this is, again, that same thing when we talk about the nativists, the people who were born here, thought of themselves as the natives, and the people coming in were then foreigners. The Native Americans feared that these immigrants, being so different culturally, would not assimilate into the United States like past immigrants have. That they would be a separate group from what is culturally white America. Another interesting note about these immigrants is that in this era, transportation costs are far lower than they had been in the past. And so many of the people that arrived in this era had come here thinking that they weren't actually gonna stay. People had come here basically thinking that they're going to come out here, they'd actually maybe left their family behind in their home countries. And they're going to be sending money back to their family, and they're going to work here. And eventually, when they feel that they've kind of made it, they would go home. The term they use for people who have this kind of attitude, and by the way, a lot of people thought that this was what they were going to do and didn't end up doing it. But this attitude, the people that had this idea, we would call birds of passage. Okay? But just like the first era of American immigration, the second era of American immigration will have a reaction. A nativist movement. In this case, okay, so this is a little bit, should have broken this up a little better. But basically, the nativists, the Native Americans, would blame immigrants for some of the problems that were developing in the United States at that time. Problems like the cities, their governments coming under the control of political bosses and conditions in the cities deteriorating. Additionally, people did not like many of the ideas that these immigrants brought with them to the United States. People from Europe in particular would bring doctrines of things like socialism, communism, and anarchism. That people would have these different ways that things ought to be done than how we do it here. And they did not like that. So, in response, in the 1880s, we see a change in American immigration policy. The United States will change from a country which was basically open as far as immigration was concerned. There was no such thing as an illegal immigrant. The only real limitations we had on immigration before this point had much more to do with health, or actually sanity. not who you were or where you came from. It's in the 1880s that the United States, in effect, invents illegal immigration. Starting with, most particularly, the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. All right, you with me here so far? Here, particularly on the West Coast, maybe even more particularly here in California, you're going to see a huge influx of immigrants from China. People fleeing poverty and political upheaval. Secretary of State Seward had actually worked out a deal with China that actually developed this immigration relationship. This immigration relationship was actually pretty beneficial to the United States because people that immigrated from China were some of the major laborers that would work in mines, gold mines in California, silver mines in Nevada, or building the Transcontinental Railroad. But in the 1870s, an issue develops. You see, many Chinese immigrant workers were willing to work for less money, and one of the reasons why they were willing and able to work for less money was that they came often as birds of passage. And if you came as a single person, okay, if you come as a single person, are you thinking of building up a family or anything like that? Maybe not. And what mightn't you do in order to make it so you make more money? You might take on several roommates that would all live together, and therefore your living costs are reduced. If your living costs are reduced, do you need to be paid as much? And so this becomes an issue once we have the Panic of 1873. When we have the Panic of 1873 and the depression that follows, the largest depression in American history up until that time, all of a sudden jobs dry up. Mining jobs, railroad jobs start drying up. And what begins is a particular conflict, mainly between two different immigrant groups. One immigrant group was a group that had been here a little bit while longer, Irish immigrants. And a newer immigrant group, Chinese immigrants. And oddly, the Irish immigrants will pretty much treat the Chinese immigrants just as they had been treated when they were the new kids on the block. Irish gangs, led by a guy by the name of Dennis Kearney, particularly around in San Francisco, would terrorize Chinese immigrants. One of the techniques that they used was one of the things that the hairstyle that Chinese immigrants oftentimes wore. They wore their hair in a long ponytail known as a queue. Well, what the Irish gangs would do is they would run down the streets with knives in their hands, grab people's ponytails, and chop them off. Okay? This would be a political cartoon that kind of illustrates the attitudes, okay? On the right, you would have the Irish family, okay? And on the left, the den of iniquity, representing the Chinese immigrants. This political cartoon would basically show Chinese immigrants being attacked principally by the various groups that made up the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party was the party that was more likely to be favored by the Irish. And the Irish had, and one of the reasons why the Irish had such a kind of influence on the Democratic Party was largely because of New York. There was a belief at that time that one of the tickets, the ways you could become president of the United States was by winning the state of New York, it being the largest electoral prize. Well, there was this belief that if you could win the Irish vote in New York, you would win, in effect, New York City. And pretty much, whatever party won New York City, won New York State. And so, basically, the demands of the Irish were oftentimes very much followed by the Democrats. To give you a little kind of view of the attitudes, this was a anti-Chinese immigrant poem that was written and distributed. It's a little bit after this era, but the era of Chinese exclusion, as we're going to find out, basically lasts all the way from the 1880s through the 1940s. I came across this poem while researching Chinese American immigration. I was able to use the special collections at UCLA for the research. What I'd like you to do real quick is soaks it. Okay? very quick. So, do you want to do one last thing before we go? So, do very bullet point. So if you haven't gotten there yet, skip down to the significance. So I don't end up holding you at the end. Let's jump down to what is the historical significance here? How would you sum it up? What would be the best way of characterizing this?
It demonstrates the large amount of Asians immigrating to America, and also the anti-Asian immigration sentiments of most of the population.
And did anyone have any trouble with any of the other parts? Yeah.
Is this speaker just a normal person? He's just Sam Beef. He's not an actual.
Yeah, and I believe he had a connection, if I'm thinking of my research correctly, he did have a connection back with Dennis County.
With the Irish States.
All right, so. In 1882, the United States will pass a law known as the Chinese Exclusion Act. What it did is it will prevent Chinese immigration to the United States. Now there's going to be an exception to this, family members. And one of the reasons why immigration will start ticking up again in the early 1900s is that one of the things that people could do is they could demonstrate that they had a relative that was a citizen of the United States. They could emigrate to the United States anyway. Well, something happened in 1906 that destroyed all of the records in the San Francisco area as far as who was or was not citizens of the United States. Does anyone know what that thing was? That something happened in 1906. Earthquake, and actually the fire it destroyed all the records. And so what basically people did was they sold their stories. People living here were in effect basically granted that they were here. And anybody who could basically show that they were related to them could emigrate. And so people sold their stories to people in China and they could come emigrate to the United States. They called them paper sons. And the United States actually ends up herding everybody into an immigration station called Angel Island off of the coast of San Francisco, where they tried to determine whether or not people were relatives or not. Okay. The other thing that these exclusionists do, so this is not part of that law, it's a separate thing, but it's kind of the same people. The other thing that the exclusionists attempted to do was strip all Chinese Americans of their citizenship. Meaning, even if you were born here, you were not a citizen of the United States. This was challenged in a Supreme Court case called the United States versus Won Kim Ark. And in this case, the United States basically underscores our current interpretation of the 14th Amendment, stating that all persons born on U.S. soil are citizens of the United States. And so that is the current precedent, that is the current law of the land. But even still, what the exclusionists will do is they will prevent anybody who was actually born in China and was now an immigrant to the United States. They were prevented from being citizens. This remains until 1942. And in 1942, the United States repeals this because we're at war with Japan and China is our ally. Okay. Next time we will talk about labor. So I would just kind of look over that third section in chapter 17 again. You might review your notes from the first two sections, kind of clarify, and look for things that are kind of like that short answer I gave you, the short answer question I gave you. It was hit kind of a big theme.